April 1945. A German woman staggers toward an American medical tent in Texas. She's been taught her entire adult life that Americans are savages who torture prisoners. Now bleeding and dying, she has no choice but to face them. What happens in the next 3 minutes will shatter everything she believes about America and about herself. The war was already ending when they found her. Not in a battle, not behind barbed wire screaming for help. She simply collapsed. The American medical tent had been set up near a temporary holding area at Camp Hearn, 12 miles outside Bryan, Texas. Mud everywhere, stretchers stacked against canvas walls. Medics exhausted from weeks of processing thousands of prisoners flooding in from Europe. The afternoon sun hung low and heavy dust drifting through the air like ash. Inside the tent, Captain Thomas Martinez checked the pulse of another dehydrated soldier. Routine work. Another day of treating malnutrition-infected blisters, cases of dysentery that wouldn't quit. Nothing dramatic, nothing that required more than fluids, rest, basic care. Then he looked up. A woman stood at the tent entrance, German clearly. She still wore the torn remnants of what might have once been a Wehrmacht auxiliary uniform. But the coat hung off her shoulders like it belonged to someone twice her size. Her face was hollow cheekbones, sharp enough to cast shadows. One hand pressed against her lower abdomen. The other shook as she gripped the tent pole, trying to stay upright. Martinez straightened, waved her forward, already reaching for a canteen. Before he could speak, she whispered in broken English, "I'm bleeding." She took one more step and collapsed at his feet. For half a second, no one moved. The tent went silent, except for the sound of her body hitting the dirt floor. Then training took over. Martinez dropped to his knees beside her. Corporal Henry Walsh abandoned the supply cabinet and grabbed a stretcher. Sergeant Robert Chen appeared from the back of the tent with scissors in hand. They lifted her carefully. Her body weighed almost nothing. They cut away the layers of filthy clothing, the coat that smelled of sweat and fear, and something worse, something that came from months without clean water or decent food. What they saw made the tent go silent again. There was blood, not fresh from a wound, not from shrapnel or bullet holes. This was something else, something older, something that had been happening for days, maybe weeks. Martinez swallowed hard. His hands moved automatically, checking pulse, checking breathing, but his mind was racing. "This isn't from combat," he said quietly. Chen nodded slowly, his face grim. "This isn't from today. This has been happening for a long time." The woman's eyes fluttered open for just a moment. She looked at the Americans standing over her. Men in uniforms she'd been taught to fear more than death itself. Her lips moved, another whisper so faint they had to lean close to hear it. "Please don't send me back." Martinez leaned closer. "Back where?" But she was already slipping away again, her breathing shallow, her pulse weak and uneven. Outside, the sounds of the camp continued. Trucks rumbling, voices calling orders, artillery thundering somewhere in the distance, a reminder that the war wasn't quite finished yet. Inside the tent, the three Americans realized they weren't just treating a prisoner of war anymore. They were about to uncover something no one had warned them about, something that would force them to choose between regulations and what was right. The woman didn't wake up right away. Martinez worked quickly, professionally. IV fluids, blankets, monitoring her vital signs every few minutes. No rushed movements, no raised voices, just calm, practiced medicine. Walsh brought warm water and clean cloths. Chen prepared medications, his hands steady, despite the questions building in his eyes. They'd treated hundreds of prisoners over the past months, German soldiers mostly. Men who'd surrendered or been captured, who arrived weak and hungry but otherwise intact. This was different. "She's not wounded," Martinez said after several minutes of examination. "No shrapnel, no bullets, nothing from combat." Chen nodded, pulling a blanket over her shoulders. "This isn't something that happened today. She's been like this for a while. Weeks, probably." They worked in silence for a few more minutes, giving her water in small sips when she was conscious enough to swallow, keeping her warm, watching her breathing settle into something slightly more regular. When her eyes finally opened again, really opened, she looked around in confusion. American uniforms, Red Cross armbands, a tent instead of a barracks. Her body tensed. Panic flickered across her face. She tried to sit up. Martinez gently raised his hand, not touching her, just a gesture. Calm, steady. "You're safe," he said slowly, choosing simple words. "No one's sending you anywhere." Her shoulders relaxed. Just a little. Just enough. After a long pause, she spoke again. Her voice was barely louder than the rain that had started hitting the canvas above them. "I didn't fall because I was tired," she said. Each word came with effort. "I fell because I couldn't stand any more." The medics exchanged a look. One of those looks that pass between people who'd seen too much, who understood without needing explanation. Martinez asked carefully, "Did this start at the front?" She shook her head. A small movement, but definite. "No," she whispered. "It started before." That was when they understood. Whatever had weakened her to this point didn't come from fighting. It came from what happened before she ever reached this camp, before she ever became America's responsibility. Now, whether they wanted to or not, they were responsible for what happened next. She was awake now, not fully strong, but conscious enough to understand where she was and who was standing around her. The rain outside had stopped. The tent was quieter. Too quiet. Martinez sat beside her stretcher clipboard, resting on his knee. He wasn't writing yet. Just holding it like the possibility of documentation was enough for now. "We need to know what happened," he said gently. Safe words, neutral tone, no pressure. For a long moment she said nothing, her eyes fixed on the canvas ceiling, watching shadows move across the fabric. Then she turned her head away and whispered something that made Martinez set the clipboard aside completely. "If you write it down, they'll find me." Martinez frowned. "Who?" Her fingers tightened around the blanket. "Anyone," she replied. "Everyone." He closed the clipboard and set it on the ground, leaned forward so she could see his face clearly. "Look at me," he said. "Right now, you're under our care. Nothing you say leaves this tent unless you want it to." That was the first time she met his eyes directly, really looked at him, searching for the lie, for the trap, for whatever cruel joke Americans played on their prisoners. She found none of it. What she told them came slowly. Broken sentences, long pauses between words. She spoke of weeks without proper food, of collapsing during forced marches, of being moved from place to place without explanation. No violence exactly, no shouting, just neglect. Endless grinding exhaustion. She didn't get weaker here, Walsh realized quietly, speaking more to himself than anyone else. Chen nodded. "She arrived this way." Martinez kept his voice low. "This didn't start in our captivity." The woman swallowed hard. Her voice cracked when she spoke again. "I didn't want to be a problem. I just couldn't stay standing anymore." Outside, soldiers walked past the tent, unaware that a quiet truth was being uncovered inside, unaware that 3 medics were about to make a decision that could end their careers. Martinez stood, looked at Chen and Walsh. A silent conversation passed between them in seconds. Then Martinez walked to the small field desk where patient files were stacked. He pulled out a manila folder. Transfer orders, deportation schedules, official paperwork with official stamps. He studied the documents for a long moment. Then, without a word, he slid them inside his jacket. Chen watched, said nothing. Walsh watched, said nothing. The woman on the stretcher watched too, though she didn't fully understand what she was seeing. Not yet. "She's stable?" an officer asked, stepping into the tent. Not the camp commander, just a lieutenant doing rounds checking on the day's intake. "For now," Martinez replied. "She needs rest, food, time." The officer nodded. "Then that's what she gets." He lowered his voice, glanced once at the stretcher. "There's no need to move her with the others tonight." He turned to the woman directly. His words were careful, measured. "You're not in trouble, and you're not being transferred." Her eyes filled, not with panic this time, with something else, something she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. Relief. Later, when the lamps were dimmed and the camp settled into uneasy quiet, Walsh returned with a tray. Nothing special. Warm soup in a metal bowl, bread, a cup of water. Small portions because that's all her stomach could handle after months of starvation. He set it down gently beside her. "Eat slow," he said. "No rush." She nodded, took the spoon with shaking hands. For the first time in weeks, no one was watching her as a number. No one was counting her steps. No one was deciding whether she was worth the resources to keep alive. Outside, the war was still ending in pieces. Surrenders happening across Europe, armies collapsing, cities burning, millions of people trying to figure out what came next. Inside the tent, 3 Americans had made a choice: to handle this quietly, to ignore the paperwork that said she should be on a train to somewhere else, somewhere darker, somewhere that might not have medics who cared whether she lived or died. They'd made a choice to make sure she would walk out of this war alive. Morning came quietly. The camp woke the way it always did. Boots in the mud, engines coughing to life, distant orders carried by the wind. Inside the medical tent, nothing rushed her. Martinez checked in with just a simple question. No forms, no paperwork. "How do you feel?" She searched for the right word, then said with something almost like wonder in her voice, "Still here." That was enough. For now, that was enough. She was allowed to sit outside the tent for a few minutes, wrapped in a blanket, watching soldiers pass by. No guards hovering over her, no shouting, just the ordinary chaos of a military camp winding down from war. A nurse brought clean water in a pitcher. Another medic adjusted the blanket when the wind picked up. Small gestures, unremarkable gestures. But to her, each one was a revelation. She noticed something small but important. No one called her by a label. Not prisoner, not transport, not problem. When they spoke to her at all, they used her name once they learned it. Margaret. Or sometimes more gently, just a nod. Just acknowledgement that she was a person, not paperwork. She didn't know how long this would last. She didn't ask. Didn't want to break whatever spell had fallen over this place, this small corner of Texas where the rules seemed to bend just enough to let her breathe. For now, standing in the morning air, feeling the ground steady beneath her feet, feeling the sun on her face without the weight of fear crushing her chest, it was enough. The war hadn't ended yet. Not officially, not completely. But for her, something else already had. The war inside her head. The war that said Americans were monsters. The war that said she deserved whatever happened to her because of the uniform she'd once worn, the country she'd once served. That war was over. And what came next, she didn't know. But for the first time in 3 years, she thought maybe, just maybe, She might survive long enough to find out. They said, Americans smiled while they hurt you. She was about to discover the smile meant something completely different. Day 3 arrived with the smell of bacon. Margaret woke to sunlight filtering through canvas and the sound of men talking quietly outside the tent. Her body still ached, but differently now. Less like dying, more like recovering. The IV had been removed from her arm sometime during the night. She could move without dizziness. Then Corporal Walsh entered, carrying a tray covered with a cloth napkin. He set it on the small table beside her cot and pulled back the cloth. What was underneath would do more to shatter her propaganda beliefs than any speech ever could. 4 strips of bacon, still warm, still glistening with fat. 2 fried eggs with yolks bright as Texas sunshine. Toast with real butter melting into the bread and strawberry jam in a small glass dish. Hash browns golden and crispy at the edges. A full glass of orange juice. And coffee. Real coffee, not the ersatz mixture of grain and acorns she'd drunk for the past 3 years. Margaret stared. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Walsh smiled that easy American smile she'd been taught meant cruelty. "Breakfast," he said simply. "Standard issue." "Standard." The word came out strangled. "This is for me." "Yep. Eat up before it gets cold." She looked at the tray again. This was more food than she'd seen in a week at the Soviet transit camp. More food than she'd eaten in a month. The bacon alone, 4 whole strips, represented a luxury she'd forgotten existed. Her hand trembled as she reached for a piece of bacon. The smell hit her first. Smoky, salty, rich, completely foreign after years of watery soup and mouldy bread. She brought it to her mouth, took a small bite. The taste exploded across her tongue. Fat and salt and smoke. Crispy texture giving way to tender meat. Her eyes closed involuntarily. For a moment she forgot where she was. Forgot everything except this single strip of bacon and the way it made her feel human again. Walsh watched her reaction. That smile again, but there was nothing cruel in it. Just satisfaction at seeing someone enjoy food the way food should be enjoyed. She chewed slowly, swallowed, opened her eyes, and found tears running down her face. "In the propaganda films," she whispered, "they told us Americans hoarded food while prisoners starved. They said you were gluttonous capitalists who would never share." Walsh pulled up a chair, sat down at a respectful distance. "And now?" Margaret looked at the tray, at the abundance still waiting there. Eggs and toast and potatoes and juice and coffee. More than enough. More than necessary. Given freely. "Now, I think maybe everything was a lie." She ate slowly, methodically. Each bite was a revelation. The eggs soft and rich. The toast still warm with butter soaking into every corner. The hash browns with their perfect crisp. The orange juice sweet and acidic and fresh. The coffee bitter and strong and real. Sergeant Chen entered with medical supplies and paused when he saw her eating. "Good," he said quietly. "You need the protein." She looked up at him. Chinese face, American uniform. Another thing the propaganda had told her was impossible. Another lie. "Even the Soviet guards didn't eat this well," she said. "And you're giving it to me. A German. An enemy." Chen set down his supplies and met her eyes. "You're not an enemy. You're a patient. There's a difference." That afternoon, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Dawson sat in his office reviewing camp records. He was a man who believed in order, regulations, proper procedure, everything documented, everything accounted for. Which was why the missing paperwork bothered him. Prisoner 471, Margareta Hoffmann, German national. Female. Wehrmacht auxiliary nurse. Captured by Soviet forces, transferred to American custody April 15th. Scheduled for repatriation to Soviet occupation zone April 20th. Except the transfer orders weren't in the file. Weren't anywhere. He summoned Captain Martinez. Martinez entered, saluted, stood at attention. His face revealed nothing. "Captain," Dawson said, his voice flat and cold. "Where are the transfer papers for German prisoner 471? "Misfiled, sir. We're looking for them." Dawson leaned back in his chair, studied Martinez for a long moment. "Don't insult my intelligence, Captain."
"I know exactly what you're doing."
Martinez remained silent, steady. "That woman is scheduled for Soviet zone repatriation. It's in the Yalta Agreement. We can't just decide to ignore international treaties because we feel like it." "Sir," Martinez said carefully, "that woman was dying when she arrived. She was systematically starved and neglected in Soviet custody. If we send her back, we're complicit in her death." "That's not our problem, Captain. Our problem is following orders." The office was silent, except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. 30 seconds. 40. A full minute. Finally, Dawson spoke again. 2 weeks. You have 2 weeks to get her stable enough for transfer. After that, I file my report." "Understood." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." "I didn't say I approved, Captain. I said you have 2 weeks. Don't make me regret this." Martinez saluted and left. Outside the office, he let himself breathe. 14 days. It wasn't much, but it was something.
Martinez had bought time. But would 14 days be enough to save a life and prove that mercy mattered more than paperwork? Days 4 through 6 passed in a rhythm of slow healing. Margaret's fever broke completely on day 5. Colour returned to her face. She gained 3 pounds, then 4, could sit up without the world spinning, could stand for short periods without her legs giving out. On the afternoon of day 5, Lieutenant Sarah Morrison entered the tent with clean clothes folded over her arm. "Margaret," she said gently, "you're strong enough now. Would you like a real shower?" Margaret blinked. A shower. Hot water, soap, clean towels, private facilities. The word hot seemed to echo in Margaret's mind. Hot water. Not cold, not rationed, not something to be fought over with other prisoners in a filthy communal space. Morrison led her to the women's shower facility, a small wooden structure with canvas walls and a real floor, not mud. Inside, steam already rising from the pipes. "Take your time," Morrison said. "I'll wait outside with fresh clothes." Margaret stood under the water and felt 4 months of filth begin to wash away. The heat soaked into her skin, into her muscles, into her bones. Real soap, ivory soap with its clean American smell. She scrubbed her hair 3 times, scrubbed her skin until it was pink and raw and clean. The tears came then, silent mixed with the water washing away with the dirt. She wept for everything she'd lost, for Johann dead at Stalingrad, for the life she'd had before the war, for the person she'd been when she still believed the Reich's promises. But also, impossibly, she wept with something like gratitude. Because she was clean. Because the water was hot. Because someone had thought to give her soap and towels and privacy and time. When she emerged, 20 minutes later, Morrison was waiting with clothes. Not a uniform. Just a simple dress, light blue cotton. Undergarments, stockings without holes, shoes that fit real leather shoes, not wooden clogs. "How do you feel?" Morrison asked. Margaret's voice broke. "Like a person." On the evening of day 6, Walsh invited her to sit at the tent entrance and watch the baseball game happening on the field beyond. Margaret had never seen baseball before, didn't understand the rules, didn't understand why grown men were running in circles or why everyone cheered when someone hit a ball with a stick. But she understood the laughter, the camaraderie, the way a black soldier and a white soldier stood on the same team, arms around each other's shoulders, celebrating together. That would have been impossible in Germany, forbidden, punishable. Walsh tried to explain the game, his enthusiasm making up for her confusion. So the pitcher throws the ball, and the batter tries to hit it, and if he hits it far enough, he runs around all the bases before someone can tag him out. She nodded, not really following, but watching his face as he talked, seeing the pure joy of explaining something he loved that she understood perfectly. A soldier hit the ball hard. It sailed over the outfielder's head. The batter ran fast, touching each base, while his teammates screamed encouragement. When he slid into home plate safe, the entire team erupted. One of the celebrating soldiers, a private still covered in dust, jogged toward the medical tent. Saw Margaret sitting there. Stopped. "Oh, hey, you're the German lady. You feeling better?" Margaret startled. Yes. Thank you." The private grinned, reaching into his pocket. "Good. Hey, you want a Coke?" He held out a green glass bottle, condensation beading on the surface. Margaret looked at Walsh. Was this allowed? Was this a test? Walsh nodded. "Go ahead." She took the bottle, cold glass against her palm. She raised it to her lips and drank. Sweet, fizzy, cold, unlike anything in Germany. A taste that seemed to embody everything American: excess, pleasure, casual generosity. The private was already jogging back to his team, laughing at something someone yelled. To him, giving a Coke to the sick German woman was nothing, barely worth remembering, just basic kindness offered without thought. That was what broke through her final defenses. Not the grand gestures, not the speeches, just a soldier sharing his Coke because she looked thirsty. Just human decency offered so casually it didn't even register as decency. Just normal behavior. She understood then. They didn't hate her. They didn't even think about hating her. She was just the German lady who'd been sick. Now she was getting better. That was all that mattered. Day 7 brought a new crisis. Chen sat down beside Margaret's cot in the morning, his face serious. "We need to perform a procedure," he said. "The retained tissue from your miscarriage is causing infection risk. If we don't address it soon, you could develop sepsis." The word miscarriage hit her like a physical blow. She'd known on some level, known that the bleeding meant she'd lost something, but hearing it said aloud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "What procedure?" she managed to ask. "Dilation and curettage. It's safe, but it requires anesthesia. You'll be unconscious for about 20 minutes. Terror flooded through her. "Unconscious? You mean I'll be asleep?" "Yes." Her hands gripped the blanket. "What will you do to me while I'm asleep?" Chen's face softened with understanding. "We'll remove the tissue that's causing the bleeding and infection risk. Nothing else. I promise you, Margaret. Nothing else." But she'd heard promises before. The Reich had made promises. The Soviets had made promises. Every promise had been a lie. Walsh appeared at her side. He must have heard the conversation. He knelt down so his eyes were level with hers. "Margaret, look at me," he said quietly. "I will be in that room the entire time. I won't leave, not for a second. And when you wake up, I'll be the first person you see. I promise you on my sister's memory nothing bad will happen." Something in his voice, in the way he invoked his dead sister, cut through her fear. Not all of it, but enough. "You'll stay," she whispered. "I'll stay." The procedure took place that afternoon. Chaplain Rosen stood outside the tent praying in Hebrew, his voice a low murmur that somehow made the world feel safer. Chen worked with steady precision. Martinez monitored her vital signs, and Walsh, true to his word, held her hand as the anesthesia pulled her under. The last thing she saw was his face. The first thing she saw when she woke was his face. "You stayed," she whispered, her voice slurred from the drugs. "I promised." She understood then, really understood, that these Americans kept their word, that their promises meant something, that maybe, just maybe, she could trust them. Day 9 arrived with a package. Chen received it during mail call, a thick envelope from the San Antonio VA hospital. He opened it in the medical tent, Martinez and Walsh looking over his shoulder. Inside was a letter. Chen read it aloud, his voice steady, but his hands shaking slightly. "To whom it may concern. My name is Lieutenant James Parker, B-17 Bombardier 8th Air Force. In October 1944, I was shot down over Germany and severely burned. I was captured and taken to a Wehrmacht field hospital near Aachen." Margareta, sitting on her cot, folding bandages, froze. "A German nurse there, I never learned her name, saved my life. She gave me morphine from her own limited supply. She changed my burn dressings twice daily. She snuck me extra water. When an SS officer ordered her to stop treating me, she defied him." The tent was completely silent now. "I've been trying to find her for months. Recently, through military channels, I heard that a German nurse matching her description is at Camp Hearn under medical care. Her name might be Margaret Hoffman. If this is her, please tell her I survived. I'm home with my wife and baby daughter, and I am alive because she chose mercy over orders. I owe her my life. Respectfully, Lieutenant James Parker, San Antonio, Texas." Chen looked up from the letter, looked at Margareta, who was crying silently, her hands covering her face. "That's you," Martinez said softly. "You're the nurse who saved him." She couldn't speak, could only nod, tears streaming through her fingers. "You saved an American pilot's life," Walsh said. "You risked everything to do it." "I didn't know," she finally managed to say. "I didn't know if any of them made it. The SS transferred me to punishment duty after they found out. I never knew what happened to him. I never knew if it mattered." Chen knelt beside her. "It mattered. He's alive because of you." Martinez made a decision right there. "I'm writing to Lieutenant Parker. I'm telling him we have you and you're going to be okay. And I'm asking him to come here." Margareta looked up confused. "Why?" "Because his testimony can protect you. If we have documented proof that you aided American POWs, you qualify for protected status under Geneva Convention Article 68. We can block your deportation to the Soviet zone, legally." For the first time since collapsing in the mud, Margaret felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Real hope. Not just hope that she'd survive the next day, but hope that she might have a future beyond survival. Lieutenant Parker's letter changed everything. But when he arrived at Camp Hearn 2 weeks later, what he brought with him would change her life forever. Days 10 through 12 passed in a new rhythm. Margaret grew stronger each day, walking unassisted, helping in the medical tent, folding bandages, organizing supplies, learning more English from Walsh, who taught her American idioms that made no sense but made her laugh anyway. On the evening of day 11, Walsh showed her a photograph, a white farmhouse, a red barn, fields stretching to the horizon. "That's home," he said. "Iowa, my family's farm." "It's beautiful," Margaret said. "Do you miss it?" "Every day." After she was gone, I needed to be somewhere I could make a difference. "So you became a medic." "So I could help people like her, people who deserved a chance." A long silence stretched between them, comfortable, understanding. "I reminded you of her," Margaret said. Not a question. Walsh hesitated. "At first, yeah. But now—" He stopped, started again. "Now you're just you, and that matters." Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings neither could afford to name. She was still technically a prisoner. He was still technically her guard. The war wasn't over. Her future was uncertain. Everything was impossible. But the feeling was there anyway. Quiet, careful, real. Day 13 shattered the fragile peace. Major William Bradford arrived unannounced. Counterintelligence corps, suspicious eyes, aggressive posture. The kind of man who saw enemies everywhere because sometimes enemies actually were everywhere. He demanded to interview prisoner 471. Martinez tried to intervene. "She's recovering from surgery. She's not strong enough for interrogation." "This isn't optional, Captain." The interview lasted 45 minutes. Bradford grilled Margareta about Soviet camps, German military movements, names of other Wehrmacht nurses, details she couldn't or wouldn't provide. His questions grew sharper, his suspicion more obvious. "How do we know you weren't a Nazi informant? How do we know you didn't help Americans just to gain favor? How do we know anything you've said is true?" Margaret's breathing grew rapid. Her hands shook. She'd been asked these questions before by the SS, by the Soviets. She'd survived those interrogations. Barely. "I helped American prisoners." Her voice rose, breaking. "I lost my husband because of it. What more do you want from me?" Bradford leaned forward, cold and unmoved. Proof. Documentation. Not just stories. Walsh, who'd been standing outside the tent, listening, had heard enough. He pushed through the canvas door, his face flushed with anger. "Interview's over. Get out." Bradford stood. "You don't have authority over me, Corporal. In this medical tent protecting my patient, I do. Out." For a moment, it seemed Bradford might push back, might pull rank, might make this into something that couldn't be walked back. Then Martinez appeared in the doorway. "Major Bradford, you'll get your proof when Lieutenant Parker arrives. Until then, as Chief Medical Officer, I'm ordering you to stay away from my patient. Her condition is still critical. Another session like this could trigger a medical crisis." Bradford's jaw tightened, but he left, threatening to file a report, promising consequences. After he was gone, Margareta sat shaking, tears running down her face. Chen worked to calm her breathing. Walsh knelt beside her cot, his hand hovering near hers, not quite touching but close enough to offer comfort. That evening, when she'd finally stopped shaking, she asked Walsh the question that had been building in her mind for days. "Why do you keep protecting me? You could get in trouble. You could lose everything." Walsh was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low, honest. "Because some things are worth losing everything for. Because watching you die when I could help would make me just like the people who let Anna die. Because—" He stopped, looked at her directly. "Because you matter. Not as a patient, not as a case, as a person, as you." The tent was silent except for the sound of rain beginning to fall outside. Margaret looked at this American corporal who'd stayed by her bedside, who'd kept his promises, who'd defended her against his own command structure. "Henry," she said, using his first name for the first time. "Yeah. Thank you." It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was all she had to give. That night, Chen brought news. "Parker's coming. He'll be here May 7th. Martinez filed preliminary petition for protected status. There's a chance, Margaret. A real chance. And if it doesn't work..." Chen smiled, that quiet American confidence she was learning to recognize. Then we find another way. We're Americans. That's what we do. That night, Walsh couldn't sleep. He sat outside the medical tent smoking a cigarette he'd bummed off another soldier when Chaplain Rosen approached. "Can't sleep either?" Rosen asked, sitting beside him. Walsh shook his head. "That interrogation today."
Bradford's going to file a report. Martinez could lose his commission. Chen could face charges. And I... He trailed off. Rosen was quiet for a moment. Then, "Did you know Geneva Convention Article 68 has a provision most people don't know about medical personnel who render aid under duress are considered non-combatants regardless of which side they served?" Walsh looked at him sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means if we can prove Margaret helped American POWs while facing threats from her own command, she's not just eligible for protection. She's entitled to it. Bradford can file all the reports he wants. International law is on our side." Walsh felt hope surge. "Why didn't Martinez mention this?" Rosen smiled. "Because Martinez is a doctor, not a lawyer. But I am both. I've been researching this since the day she arrived. We just needed proof. And now, thanks to Parker's letter, we have it. May 7th, 1945. The day Lieutenant James Parker arrived at Camp Hearn was also the day the war in Europe officially ended. But for Margaret Hoffman, the real war, the war for her future, was just reaching its climax. The war ended with surrender. Her new life began with a handshake. May 7th, 1945. Morning broke over Camp Hearn with news that travelled faster than the Texas wind. Germany had surrendered, unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. The camp erupted. Soldiers poured out of barracks shouting, crying, embracing. Someone fired a rifle into the air, then another, then a dozen more. Celebratory gunfire mixed with cheers and laughter and the sound of grown men weeping with relief. Margaret stood at the entrance of the medical tent, wrapped in a blanket, watching the chaos. Her emotions were a tangle she couldn't unravel. Relief that the killing had stopped. Grief that Germany had been crushed, that everything Johann had died for had come to nothing. Uncertainty about what happened now to her, to all the prisoners, to the fractured world. Walsh found her there, standing alone while the camp celebrated around her. "You okay?" he asked. She didn't know how to answer. Germany lost. Everything Johann fought for. It was all for nothing. Walsh stood beside her, not touching but close. "He didn't fight for nothing. He fought because he was ordered to, but he died proud of you for doing the right thing. That's not nothing." She wanted to believe that. Wasn't sure she could. But the words helped anyway. The celebration continued through the morning. At noon, a dusty jeep pulled up to the medical tent. A man stepped out. Tall, thin, scarred. Burn scars covered the left side of his face and neck, disappearing under his collar. His hands were scarred too, the skin shiny and tight. Lieutenant James Parker had arrived. Martinez greeted him, shook his hand, led him toward the tent. Margaret saw him coming. Her heart began to race. She remembered this man, remembered his screams when she changed his dressings, remembered his gratitude when she gave him morphine she wasn't supposed to have, remembered the way he'd looked at her with eyes that said thank you when he had no other way to say it. Parker entered the tent, saw her sitting on the cot. Recognition hit them both at the same moment. "It's you," Parker said, his voice breaking. "My God, it's really you." Margaret stood on unsteady legs. "Lieutenant Parker." He crossed the tent in 3 long strides, grasped both her hands in his scarred ones. His grip was firm but gentle. "You saved my life," he said. The words tumbled out fast like he'd been holding them in for months. "You gave me morphine when you had almost none.
You changed my burn dressings when that Nazi officer threatened to shoot you for wasting supplies on an American. You snuck me water when I was burning with fever. You—" His voice broke completely. "You're the reason I'm standing here." Margaret was crying, couldn't stop. "I didn't know if you survived. After they transferred me to punishment duty, I never knew what happened to any of the Americans I treated. I never knew if it mattered." "It mattered," Parker said fiercely. "I'm alive because of you, and now it's our turn to save you." He spent 3 hours with Martinez and the camp legal officer, gave detailed written testimony, described his injuries, the treatment he received, the risks Margaret had taken, described the SS officer who'd ordered her to stop the way she'd defied him anyway, described waking up one morning to find her gone transferred somewhere as punishment for showing mercy. The legal officer, a captain named Morrison, reviewed the testimony carefully. "This qualifies her for protected status under Geneva Convention Article 68. Medical personnel who aided enemy POWs are entitled to protection and cannot be forcibly repatriated to areas where their safety is at risk." Martinez looked at Margareta. "The Soviet zone qualifies as an area of risk. We can block the deportation, legally." Hope bloomed in Margaret's chest. Real hope. The kind that hurt because it felt too big to hold. Before Parker left, he gave her an envelope. "From my wife," he said. "She wanted you to have this." Inside was a photograph. Parker in civilian clothes, arm around a pretty dark-haired woman. She held an infant maybe 2 months old, all 3 of them smiling at the camera. There was also a letter handwritten in careful script. "Dear Margaret, my husband told me what you did for him. You gave him morphine when he was screaming in pain. You changed his dressings when infection would have killed him. You risked your life to save his. Because of you, my daughter has a father. Because of you, I still have my husband. I will never forget what you did. You will always have family in Texas. With deepest gratitude, Margaret Parker, San Antonio." Margaret pressed the letter to her chest and wept. Great shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep inside. Everything she'd thought was lost, her actions during the war, Johann's pride in her, the idea that mercy mattered, it all, suddenly had meaning again. Parker's final words before he climbed back into the Jeep stayed with her. "When you're settled, you come visit us. That's not a request. You're family now." The next days passed in a bureaucratic blur. Parker's testimony was filed with Allied Command. The protected status petition was submitted. Counter orders to the deportation were drafted. On May 10th, Lieutenant Colonel Dawson summoned Martinez to his office. Martinez entered, stood at attention, prepared for the worst. Dawson sat behind his desk, Parker's testimony file open in front of him. He was silent for a long time. Then he spoke. "Captain, I've received documentation regarding prisoner 471. Testimony from Lieutenant Parker. Petition for protected status. Geneva Convention Article 68. Martinez said nothing. Waited. "This is the most creative interpretation of regulations I've seen in 20 years. Dawson's voice was flat, unreadable. "Sir, I can explain." Dawson held up a hand. "I'm not finished. It's also the most justified." Dawson was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke again, his voice different, softer. "I should tell you something, Captain. My daughter Sarah died in the London Blitz in 1943. She was 22 years old, a nurse, volunteering at a civilian hospital when the bombs fell." Martinez remained silent, not knowing what to say. "If a German medic had saved her life," Dawson continued, "I would want someone somewhere to show that person mercy. I would want someone to choose humanity over paperwork." He looked directly at Martinez. "So when I see what you've done here, I don't see a violation of regulations. I see what my daughter would have wanted." He picked up the deportation orders, tore them in half, then tore them again. Medical hold indefinite. Petition approved pending Allied Command review. File this as a humanitarian case under my signature. Martinez felt the tension drain from his shoulders. Sir. Thank you, sir. Dawson looked at him directly. Don't thank me. Thank Lieutenant Parker for his timing. And Captain, I never want to hear about this again. You won't, sir. On May 15th, Chen signed Margaret's medical discharge papers. She'd gained 27 pounds. Her blood counts were normal. Physically, she was healthy. You're cleared for release to International Refugee Organization custody, Martinez told her. You'll be transferred to the San Antonio DP camp for processing and eventual repatriation to the American zone in Germany. When? Margaret asked. May 22nd. 20s.
1 week. The final week passed too quickly and too slowly. Chen received shipping orders for the Pacific Theatre. On May 18th, he came to say goodbye. I wanted you to have this, he said, holding out a small jade pendant on a silver chain. It was my mother's. She gave it to me when I enlisted. I can't take this, Margaret protested. You can, because you're going to need protection more than me. Promise me you'll wear it. She put it on the jade cool against her skin. I promise. I'll never take it off. Chen smiled. Good. Now live well. That's how you thank me. On May 19th, Chaplain Rosen brought her a small prayer book, German and English, on facing pages. When you're lost, he said, these words will remind you that you're not alone. He placed his hand on her head in blessing. May you find peace, and may you remember always that you survived for a reason, to help others survive. On May 20th, Martinez called her to his office one last time. He handed her a thick envelope. Inside was everything she needed. Complete medical records carefully edited to protect her. A letter of recommendation to the International Refugee Organization. $200 in cash donated by the medical staff. Train tickets from Camp Hearn to Houston to San Antonio. And a letter from Parker with his home address. Martinez's voice was rough when he spoke. I've signed a lot of discharge papers in this war, but this one matters. Margaret tried to find words big enough to hold her gratitude. Found none. How do I thank you? You don't thank someone for doing what's right. You promise to do the same for someone else someday. I promise, she whispered. May 22nd arrived with dawn light and the smell of coffee. Margaret dressed in the clean civilian clothes the nurses had given her. A simple blue dress, a brown coat that actually fit, sturdy leather shoes. She packed her small bag. Prayer book, jade pendant around her neck, Parker's photograph, medical papers, her wedding ring on its chain tucked safely in an inside pocket. The medical staff gathered for an informal goodbye. No ceremony, no speeches, just handshakes and quiet words, and one nurse who hugged her so tight it hurt. Walsh was assigned to escort her to the train station in Bryan, 12 miles away. He borrowed an army jeep. They loaded her bag. And then they were driving away from Camp Hearn, away from the place where she'd collapsed and nearly died and learned to live again. The Texas countryside rolled past, spring morning, bluebonnets blooming purple and blue along the roadside, the first real beauty Margaret had seen in years. They drove in silence for the first few miles, neither knowing how to start the conversation they both knew was coming. Finally Walsh spoke. Can I ask you something? Anything. What will you do after the DP camp when you get to Germany? Find my brother Klaus in Munich. He's a teacher. Then, she paused. I don't know. Maybe be a nurse again if anyone will hire a German. You'll be a great nurse. You already are. More silence. Then Margaret asked the question she'd wanted to ask for days. Why did you stay that first night when I was dying? You could have left me with another medic. Walsh took a long breath. Anna's death taught me what helplessness feels like. I joined the medical corps so I'd never feel that way again, so I'd never watch someone die who didn't have to. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. I reminded you of her. At first, but then you became just you, and that mattered on its own. Margaret felt tears building. I'm afraid, Henry. What if I get to Germany and there's nothing left? What if Klaus didn't survive? What if I'm alone? Then you build something new. That's what survivors do. He glanced at her. Is that what I am? A survivor? That's exactly what you are. You survived Soviet camps. You survived almost dying. You survived believing everyone was your enemy. And now you get to live. Really live. The train station came into view. Small town. Busy with soldiers going home, families reuniting. The sounds of peace replacing the sounds of war. Walsh parked the jeep, helped her down, carried her bag to the platform. The train was already there, steam rising from the engine. 10 minutes until departure. He handed her a paper bag. Food for the journey. She looked inside. Bacon sandwiches, apples, a chocolate bar, a thermos of coffee. Tears filled her eyes again. Walsh hesitated, then spoke in a rush, like if he didn't say it now, he never would. I need to tell you something. That first night when you said in your fever that you'd helped American boys, I knew then you were different. I looked through your confiscated documents while you were sleeping, found Johann's letter, found your nurse certification, saw the notation about your reassignment for helping POWs. Margaret stared at him. You knew before Parker's letter came. I knew. That's why I stayed. I knew you'd saved American lives. And I knew if we didn't save yours, we'd be no better than the people who let Anna die. You could have been court-martialed for that. Some things are worth the risk. The train whistle blew. Final boarding call. They stood facing each other on the platform. Around them people rushed and shouted and embraced. They stood in a small island of silence. In another life, Henry Walsh, Margaret said softly, I would have loved to know you longer. His voice was rough. In another life, Margaret Hoffman, I would have asked you to stay. She touched his hand briefly, then picked up her bag and boarded the train. She found a window seat, looked out. Walsh stood on the platform, one hand raised in farewell. She raised hers in return. The train lurched, began to move. Walsh grew smaller. Then he was gone. Margaret sat back in her seat as Texas landscape rolled past, opened the paper bag, found a note tucked inside Walsh's handwriting. You're going to be okay. You're stronger than you think. And if you ever need anything, you have family in Texas now. H.W. She folded the note carefully, put it in her pocket with the jade pendant. Then she opened one of the bacon sandwiches and ate slowly, tasting America with every bite. Outside, the war-torn world was trying to heal. Inside the train car, one German nurse who'd expected torture and found mercy was heading toward a future she couldn't yet imagine. But she knew this much. She'd survived, and she would spend the rest of her life making that survival mean something. 20 years later, May 1965, Camp Hearn held a commemoration ceremony. The camp had been closed since 1946, but the buildings still stood. A historical marker was being dedicated. Among the guests were Dr. Henry Walsh and Dr. Margaret Hoffman Walsh. They'd been married 3 years. Both worked at hospitals in San Antonio. Both mentored young medical students.
Both opened their home to refugees who needed a place to start over. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez attended now a retired full colonel. Sergeant Chen came from San Francisco, where he'd spent 30 years with the VA hospital system. Lieutenant Parker was there with his wife Margaret and their daughter Sarah, now 20 years old and studying to be a nurse. Margaret was asked to speak. She stood before the crowd of veterans and families and young people who barely remembered the war. She wore the jade pendant Chen had given her. She held Walsh's hand. 20 years ago, she began, I collapsed in a medical tent at this camp. I expected torture. I received care. I expected hatred. I received kindness. I expected death. I received life. Her voice was steady, strong, the voice of someone who'd survived and thrived. The Americans who saved me didn't do it for recognition. They did it because it was right. Captain Martinez, Sergeant Chen, Corporal Walsh. They taught me what it really means to be American, not the propaganda version, the real version. She looked at the three men standing together, older now, but still recognizable. It means choosing mercy when regulations say otherwise. It means seeing the human being, not the uniform. It means keeping promises, even when it costs you everything. Her voice grew softer, more personal. I came to America as an enemy. I stayed as a citizen. And I have spent every day since proving that their mercy wasn't wasted on me. The crowd stood and applauded. Margaret embraced Martinez, then Chen, then her husband. 4 people who'd been brought together by war and held together by the choice to do what was right instead of what was easy. That evening, driving home through the Texas countryside, Walsh asked, "You okay?" Margareta smiled. "I was just thinking about that morning, when you drove me to the train station." "I think about that morning a lot." "You told me I was going to be okay." "I did. You were right." The car drove into the sunset past fields of bluebonnets still blooming after 20 years. 2 people who'd survived war found each other, built a life together. Margaret looked out the window at the land she'd learned to call home, thought about the girl she'd been collapsing in the mud, certain she was about to die, thought about the woman she'd become, a doctor, a wife, an American. The war had taken everything from her, her husband, her country, her health, her future. But America had given her something back, a second chance, a new life, a reason to survive. And 50 years later she would still be here, still healing people, still proving that mercy mattered, still showing that choosing humanity over hatred was never the wrong choice. That was the America she knew, the America that saved her, the America worth believing in. In 2004, Dr. Margaret Hoffman Walsh died peacefully at age 88, surrounded by the family she and Henry had built together. Her obituary in the San Antonio Express-News was 3 columns long. At her funeral, James Parker, now 85 and frail, spoke the eulogy. "She saved my life twice," he said. "Once in 1944 when she gave me morphine and changed my burn dressings. Again in 1945 when she showed me what mercy actually looks like. She taught all of us that surviving isn't enough. You have to live in a way that honors the second chance you got." He paused, overcome with emotion, then finished. Margaret survived, and then she spent 60 years making sure others could survive too. That's what Americans do, the real Americans, the ones who choose mercy over revenge, humanity over hatred, life over convenience. She was more American than most people born here, and we were blessed to know her. Years after that, a bronze plaque was installed at the old Camp Hearn site. In 1945, American medical personnel at this camp chose mercy over regulations, humanity over hatred, and life over convenience. This is the America we strive to be.
Below that, in smaller letters, dedicated to Captain Thomas Martinez, Sergeant Robert Chen, and Corporal Henry Walsh, who proved that doing what's right matters more than following orders, and to Margaret Hoffman Walsh, who survived because they made that choice. The war ended in 1945, but the ripples of mercy, the consequences of choosing humanity, those echoed forward through decades, through lives saved, through students mentored, through refugees welcomed, through a simple truth proven over and over. Sometimes the greatest victories don't happen on battlefields. They happen in medical tents, in quiet decisions made when no one's watching, in the choice to see a human being instead of an enemy. That's the war story that matters, the one about Americans who chose mercy, and the German nurse who survived because they did. That's the America worth remembering, worth fighting for, worth believing in, even now, especially now.